So upcoming will be the second keynote speech. And this keynote speech will be talking about on Hong Kong roles as the global business hub and also high relevance of ESG. So now let's put our hand together and welcome Mr. Stephen Phillips, Director General of Invest Hong Kong, to come up to the stage for the keynote speech. Mr. Phillips, please.
Great. Well, good morning, everybody. And first of all, thank you very much indeed for inviting me to join you. I think this is an incredible subject that we're talking about today. I'm probably the least expert person in the room and probably the most generalist person that will speak this morning. So what I'm really going to do is step back and really offer a view of how I see ESG in the context of the work of Invest Hong Kong. So that's very much the global work that the Hong Kong government does. So I'll talk a little bit about the role of Hong Kong as a global business hub, but it does really relate to ESG quite highly. I'm going to take quite a broad definition of the ESG, not just the reporting part, but also how it sort of permeates through all of the businesses that we work with, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about that. So perhaps I can start by working out where I can see my slides. I'll ask you just to click through the slides if you don't mind, because I'm going to struggle with the clicker. I'd like to talk a little bit about Invest Hong Kong for those of you who don't know us, and how we work within the government and how we work with the private sector. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about this role of Hong Kong as a global business hub. And this really is very important. Pratima actually noted Hong Kong's positioning just within ESG is not only about Hong Kong itself, but also Hong Kong as a regional business hub. I'd like to offer some of the insights that I have on ESG from the companies that we work with. And we work with multinationals all the way through to individual entrepreneurs across every sector of the economy. And then I'll just conclude with perhaps some challenges and opportunities. So moving on to the next slide, please. Could you move to the next slide? Could somebody? Oh, sorry. Sorry, that was the Invest Hong Kong slide. Sorry, I wasn't aware of what's behind me. So in terms of Invest Hong Kong, we're a department of the Hong Kong SAR government, and our job is to both attract and retain international investment to Hong Kong. As I said, we work across the whole economy, companies of every size and shape. And the reason that we exist is really twofold. One is to bring best-of-class companies into Hong Kong to add to the economic mix. For the economists in the room, it's the spillover effects into the wider economy. And secondly, it's about the job creation that international and mainland companies have in Hong Kong. About 473,000 people are employed by international and mainland companies in Hong Kong. So it's a big part of the economy. Day to day, what we do is we help companies at every step of the way set up through talking to lawyers and so forth, launching the business, and ultimately we work with companies to help them find growth opportunities. That could be into the Greater Bay Area, the rest of the country, ASEAN, and so forth. As I said, we cover every sector of the economy. You can see we've got three broad teams. So an innovation-led team, which has a particular startup team within it. Our financial services, family offices, fintech, and professional services team. And you heard Dixon speak. And then we've got a lifestyle and creative team. Outside Hong Kong, we've got offices in 31 locations around the world, which effectively is the sales arm of the Hong Kong government. I'd also mention that we have a role on talent attraction, including the new scheme for ESG. So perhaps now I can turn to the next slide and really give you a bit of a flavour of the robust global business environment. I think we're probably all too familiar with some of the negative media headlines about Hong Kong. Not all media, but some media. So I'd like to share with you some facts, because facts are really what businesses need to deal with. At Invest Hong Kong, we do two big surveys each year. One that measures the number of mainland and international companies, and one that tracks the startup ecosystem. So our main survey on international and mainland companies was launched just a couple of weeks ago, and the total number of companies stands at 9,049. That is a record high. So these headlines that you see about an exodus of companies from Hong Kong just simply isn't true. The data does not support it. And I can tell you my day-to-day work tells me that's not true. The biggest sources of investment continue to be largely either the mainland or the big developed economies. But you'll note that Singapore is our fifth largest source of investment. Worth bearing in mind because most people internationally always compare Hong Kong versus Singapore. But if a country that's more or less the same size as Hong Kong sees Hong Kong as so important to be our fifth largest source of investment, I think that says that we're doing something pretty good here in Hong Kong. Perhaps now I can move on to the next slide and talk a little bit about what's happening in the startup ecosystem. Because I think through this survey, what we're seeing is the beginning of the reshaping of Hong Kong's economy. Our traditional legacy investment tends to be in everything that people think about Hong Kong: trading, import-export, logistics, financial services. But when we look at the startup ecosystem, it is much more tech-driven, not surprisingly. But again, the headline figures are great. A record number of startups in Hong Kong last year, and a record number of people employed by those startups. Top sectors fintech, we've got 614 fintech in Hong Kong at the latest count. But you can see that the sectors represented are much more tech-driven. Whilst it doesn't feature in the top one, biotech and life sciences is a really fast-growing one and one to watch out for. What's also unique about our startup ecosystem, compared to many other parts of the world, is how international it is by its nature. 28% of startups have got founders who come from outside Hong Kong. So hopefully that gives you just a little bit of a feel of the breadth of work that we do at Invest Hong Kong, the sectors that we work across, from multinationals all the way through to those entrepreneurs. So really moving on to the next slide and the core of today's discussion around about ESG. In absolutely everything that we do, we see ESG running through it almost like a stick of rock. So whether it's on a sector basis, every sector that we're talking to is talking ESG. Every country in the world where we've got investors from are looking at ESG. And all sizes of companies are also talking to us about ESG. And when I say ESG, I really do mean in the wider sense. So there's the ESG reporting part, lots of discussions around net zero and climate change, not surprisingly. Some work that we do around the UN's SDGs, which are obviously somewhat related. Some fantastic, really major global companies actually embed SDGs in their KPIs and their reporting, something that I don't think we've really seen yet in Hong Kong on a widespread level, and something that we should, I think, really encourage. What we're seeing in the startup community is so many entrepreneurs who are so purpose-driven. It could be SDG related or tackling a social issue within society. So there's lots of signs of things changing and that the business community is embracing ESG. I think when we talk to the international community, particularly companies from Europe, they really do think that we're behind the game here in Hong Kong. And Dixon alluded to it, but I think he was a little bit polite. I think we're a long way behind what's going on in Europe, frankly. And we've got a long way to catch up. So I think the more people like there are in this room who advocate change at all levels in society, I think is really important. In terms of some of the big blocks of themes that I see, I suppose the work that we do around startups is really about these purpose-driven people, really entrepreneurs looking to make a difference, to solve the problems that society has got, whether they're social issues or related to climate change or whether it's plastic waste in the ocean and that type of stuff. We're seeing lots and lots of people really embracing that. Each year we run a big startup festival as part of our work, and for the first time this year we included a part around SDGs. And the bit that gave me most hope about the future was actually something we did with school children. We had about 20 school children from the age of 8 up to about 15 who came in to present their business plans related to SDGs. And boy, would they put most business people to shame with their passion and the way that they're really thinking about the future. In the mainstream corporate side, I think we're seeing more and more big Hong Kong corporates taking corporate innovation to heart, but combining it with real values. So I think we're beginning to see movement there, but there's still a long way to go. Dixon was talking a little bit about the work that we do with family offices, and very often the philanthropic part of what families offices do is really where much of the ESG-related activity at the personal level goes on. And we see more and more of that happening. That is not just related to what they do philanthropically in Hong Kong. Very often it relates to what they're looking to do in the mainland and indeed other parts of the region. Reporting and regulation, obviously what we've been talking about already, and I won't go into detail, but many companies exercise by it, many companies need help on it, many companies don't have the data, all of the issues that we've touched on already. And then a big chunk of what we see is really in that green finance space. I think both Hester and Mervyn touched on the need in Hong Kong that we need more green projects in the real economy. I think we've got a disconnect between wanting to be a green finance centre and not actually having the green projects in Hong Kong to finance. So that's a bit of a personal bugbear there. But I think there's scope. I think if we look at the built environment, that's one very good example. Obviously, the carbon intensity of the high-rise buildings that we've got is one area where that's very obvious. So I think that those are probably the big blocks of what we see. Maybe I'll just move on to a couple of other slides. I think a lot of them we've already touched on, so I won't dwell on them. We've had a lot of discussion already on the financial services space, and I won't recap what others have said. This survey actually by KPMG and HKIFA, I think is quite interesting in that the vast majority of respondents see ESG reporting as really important. Only a small number, 11%, neither agree or disagree, and non-disagree. So that's encouraging on the face of it. Skipping to the next slide, again, I think the earlier panel and the next panel will cover this off in much more detail. So I won't delve into it and sort of gloss over the detail here. But certainly what we do see is with listed companies that we're working with, many of them are grappling with how they comply with the changing environment. And that particularly includes some of the mainland listed companies that we work with in Hong Kong. Really to wrap up, maybe I can move on to some sort of challenges, but also opportunities that I see. This is very much skewed to the sort of financial sector, but educating retail investors, I'd actually draw this out to educating the population more generally. I think we've got some way to go in terms of getting Hong Kong to be rather more in light on like other places in the world. You know, we only need to look at what's happened with waste management in Hong Kong and how tricky that issue has been to get pricing for waste disposal. Decades behind other parts of the world. Definitely talent is an issue. We see it, we hear it. At Invest Hong Kong, we will be playing a role to try and bring in some of that talent. But of course, we want to see that talent homegrown as well. I think lots of speakers have already touched on the data point, so I won't go into detail on that. But in all of this, I see great opportunities for collaboration. For Invest Hong Kong, we'd love to collaborate with people in the room to do joint work together. We need to help international mainland investors coming in to understand the environment in Hong Kong, both what they need to overcome, but also where the opportunities are. And secondly, in terms of almost like business matching, business introductions. If you're looking for international companies that have particular technology, particular expertise, then we would love to know, and then we can help you find partners from around the world that then might set up here, might generate jobs for the people of Hong Kong, and really a true win-win outcome. So just to leave you with my contact details, I know that I've been big picture, I've zoomed right out, but I really do think this is such a cross-cutting issue that sometimes it's good to take that helicopter view. Most of all, really, really genuinely open collaboration ideas. So do get in touch. You can find me on LinkedIn very easily. But once again, thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to sponsor today's event. And once again, Tony, thank you for the invitation. Thank you.